I witnessed something horrible and tragic that to this day, I still hold with me. I can't get rid of it. I even feel a little bit of guilt, even though I recognize that deep down it was not truly my fault. I just wish I could have known and reacted sooner. I wish I could have done anything to prevent it from happening. Back in 1999, right after the end of the Kosovo War, NATO deployed KFOR, which was basically aiming to prevent hostilities following the end of the war and putting an end to paramilitaries and localized political violence. Even after the war was over, there were still insurgents dotted all around the country, taking control of villages, still carrying out attacks. It's too much to explain here, but the Kosovo Liberation Army was engaged in a full-scale armed insurgency against the Yugoslavian and Serbian forces located in the country. NATO launched a bombing campaign against Yugoslavia that lasted around 70 days, and the war was over by June, but the revenge attacks and the bombings and the operations, they just did not stop. Refugees were being slaughtered, and the entire country was in a state of unrest. I was a part of KFOR and was sent kind of like peacekeeping troopers in order to deter anyone from doing anything stupid and just putting a stop to all of the violence. I was in the first wave. I had to deal with a lot of stuff, but something we often did was do patrols and provide humanitarian assistance to nearby villages. These villages were often utilized as hideouts by the insurgents because they provided good cover and protection from any armed forces, since there were plenty of civilians around that we could not openly engage with. They often strong-armed the locals into cooperation. These villages would end up starving and neglected, and so this particular day, we were sent on a deployment, clearing routes near a rural village that had not been contacted for a couple of weeks. We were taking along food, water, blankets, basically any type of aid that you can think of, especially medication, which had become pretty hard to acquire in the area since the war began. So people were suffering and dying from things that were perfectly treatable, and they were suffering a lot of pain. Of course, we couldn't just roll up though. We had to dispatch a convoy in order to protect the trucks bringing the supplies, just in case insurgents on the road attempted to sabotage these supplies, or even take them along for their own cause. That was not the only thing. We had to clear out the roads entirely too. Landmines were not an uncommon sight. There was also the chance of an ambush along certain roads depending on the area that we were in and the level of unrest. And so our job was to make sure that they were safe so that we could help those who needed it the most. I shit you not, to this day, Kosovo still has a lot of unexploded landmines and ordnance in certain contamination zones in the country. There have been massive cleanup operations in order to make the country safer in the following years, but they still have not all been removed. I think I saw a pledge recently that said they were aiming to remove everything by 2030. That is how long it has taken. I won't bore you with the politics of the situation. I don't want to make the story any longer than it needs to be. I don't want to bore you with the mundane military aspects and the day-to-day checklist type stuff. I don't want to make the story any longer because it makes me feel sick to remember sometimes. We had a convoy with some military vehicles up front, an APC to be exact. The supply trucks were towards the middle of the convoy with an APC beside them, as well as a comms vehicle and an armored ambulance. That's just to give you an idea. That is not exact. So we travel for a while and we suffer no problems. The roads start to become a lot thinner, a lot more blocked off by structures on either side of us. This is where things start to get really ropey and I am on edge, because at any point at all, we have to expect an attack. We have to constantly be on the lookout for any kind of movement in the distance, and if we aren't alert for mines, then it would spell the end for us. Genuinely, we had to check every slight little area. The convoy was barely making progress. We had to move so slowly. We had to be so vigilant. So at this point, we're probably a couple of miles out from the village at this point, and we come to a sort of crossroads with these two lanes heading in separate directions that wind around the path. Like I said, there is buildings all around, though they all seem gutted with no visible windows. The convoy gets called to a complete halt. I am leaning out of my vehicle. People are on comms. The situation is being figured out. I get called over outside. The left path. It did not take us long to figure out what was wrong. It was very clearly a trap. We could see where the dirt nearby had been disturbed and then covered back up, and this went on for quite a while down the lane. We could see where stones had been kicked up and moved in order to make it look less suspicious. And further down, there was a clear mound that no one had even bothered to make look less conspicuous. It was very clearly an entire lane of mines laid out in order to cut off this village from aid completely. Cue a lot of waiting and a lot of back and forth with superiors. Meanwhile, we have a boy running towards us from over the hills. He has his hands up. We engage with him. We get him to lay down, and we manage to search and clear him from a safe distance, and the situation is diffused. He seemed to come from the village, but took like a very deliberate path. He didn't come from the left lane, and he did not use the right lane either. He came from somewhere else, I'm not sure where. This boy could not speak English at all, so we needed our interpreter to help us out. He turned out to be a local from the nearby village we were headed to, and he was actually asking us for help. He seemed pretty panicked and desperate, and he told us a pretty interesting story. He actually told us that he was sent here to help us, which took us by surprise. He told us that some insurgents in the nearby area had shown up and taken control of the village by force a couple of weeks ago. He told us that they were all armed to the teeth and using nearby houses to hide caches of weapons and to move in and out of undetected by any of us. The kid seemed really frightened. He had a black eye and a ton of bruises all over his body. I could be wrong, but it looked like he actually had a bullet wound in his thigh area that was pretty old and scarred over. He continued telling us his story. He told us how they had come into the area pointing guns at everyone. He said they saw them take his mother and beat her. One of the men punched her in the face and dragged her into a nearby house, and he could hear her screaming. He said he tried to run inside and save her, but that they stopped him and pinned him down. He said they forced him to listen, all while it went on. Apparently, the insurgents had basically confiscated all of their food and water supplies, and that the people were starving because they were being rationed. He said that he'd already seen his friend drop dead due to dehydration. We asked him why he was here, and he said it was to guide us. He said that he knew the insurgents' plans and knew which roads were safe and which would have mines or be lined with ambushes. He said he managed to sneak away while they were not looking, that he was lucky to get out. He said he risked his life just to get here. He said he just wanted his mother and his friends to be free and safe, and that he wanted to stop us from being blown up so that we could help and finally free his village. We were still back and forth with command, relaying this information being fed to us, scrutinizing it, still checking around for any other kind of explosives or traps. So we kept talking to him in the meantime. He went on to say that the insurgents were forcing people to fight and do their bidding, that they would not hand over food to people unless they did as they were told. He apparently had not eaten a meal in almost a week, and I mean, he did look stick thin, so I kinda believed him. He went on to warn us about the left lane, and that the path was completely littered with mines. He said there was not a single safe place on that lane, and that it was rigged to completely destroy an entire convoy and to cut off supplies so they could control the people in the village and move in and out very safely. He was insistent on leading us around the right-hand side and said that he could lead us all the way to the village down a path the insurgents were unlikely to be watching and that was relatively unguarded. The kid seemed well-intentioned, but of course, we couldn't just follow him and take his word. The entire deployment was sat on their hands for a while before we finally got the go-ahead, but to proceed with the usual caution. We hadn't spotted any traps or signs of explosives in the area, and command were happy for us to proceed down a different path. We offered the kid some food and a ride up in one of the front vehicles, but he refused and wanted to walk ahead in order to guide us. I think that's around the time I got my first gut feeling. My gut feeling telling me something was just wrong or off, and I hate myself for not listening to it. I mean, it just seems strange that the kid would not jump on the food. I don't know. Maybe he was still scared and feeling threatened, and that's why he didn't feel comfortable. But I don't know. I feel like his hunger would outweigh any of his other senses, especially being such a young kid. But yeah, this is where things took a turn for the worst. We followed along behind him pretty slowly and carefully, making sure to perform our usual checks and making sure that we did not let our guard down. The kid was way out ahead of us, but once he got to a certain point, he just kind of stood in place and called us further along. We were not idiots. We were still maintaining vigilance, but you can't account for everything. We pulled up pretty close to the kid, but he would not move any further forward, so we stopped. Something seemed fishy. He kept asking us to keep going, but he seemed hesitant, panicked even. He kept looking behind him, over his shoulder, and inching backwards a tiny amount while looking down at his own feet, almost as if he was double-checking his exact position. The front vehicle is not going any further, but is pulled right up to this boy. I think the boy realized that we were not going to move until he did, and so he did go forward, but not like how we expected. He kind of closed his eyes, and I think took a deep breath from what I could see. I was leaning out of my vehicle at this point to see what the holdup was, and the boy just takes one step. He seems to hover his leg forward and then take one big step that he forced down, and boom, massive fucking explosion. I seen multiple explosions all go off at once. It's like a chain reaction. It looked like an entire minefield just went up all at once. There must have been a dozen or so, all positioned near each other. It was hard to tell in the moment with all of the chaos going on and people shouting and screaming, but they did not look laid out in a straight line from where I saw them go up. It looked designed for people to trip them up while trying to approach someone caught in the middle, almost as if they were designed that someone would hit one and then someone would try and help them and they would get hit by the next. The front vehicle was so close to the blast that it did not survive without damage. The driver in the front had these horrible burns all across his body and looked to be in so much pain. The guy next to him was dead from his injuries. Everyone else in the convoy was fine. No one else had been caught in the blast. None of the other vehicles were even close enough. But the boy, he was still alive. I saw him down on the floor, basically in a heap. I could hear him crying, like full-on sobbing and begging. Now he was speaking English. I guess he knew English all along and was just lying to us about not being able to speak it. I'm not sure if it was in an attempt to throw us off, or if he thought he could deceive the translator easier than us. I'm not sure. He is just a torso on the floor. Both of his legs have been blown off. There was so much smoke in the air, and this horrible smell I will never ever forget. There were bits of clothing and bits of, well, human everywhere. He was begging us for help. He had so many injuries all across his body. It was pretty clear he would die in a short amount of time without medical attention. The only problem was that we could not risk it. He was assuring us that all of the mines had gone up, that they were all of them, that they had to go and help him right now. But we had no way to know for sure. It would have been suicide to get anywhere near him, and we were currently treating our leading driver as best as we could, and the medics were trying their best to keep him alive. It wasn't just our decision either. Our superiors made it clear that no one was to approach whatsoever, that we could not risk the safety of any of our men, that the safety of the convoy and those supplies reaching their destination intact was the most important thing to ensure, that if we risked saving this boy and failed, that many, many more people would die in that village. The boy just kept on calling out for help. I don't even know if he was fully lucid at this point. I know he could not lift up his body. He was just staring up at the sky while calling out to us, shouting about how we had to do it, that we had to help him, that we had to go over and save him. When this failed and we did not go over, he started rambling about other things. He started telling us how he was forced to, that he had no choice, that if he did not do what they said and try to lead us into the mines, that they would never let his mother go, that she was going to die if he failed, and that then he would die too. In between sobs, he was screaming that he was sorry, begging us to forgive him. After that, he started praying in his own language. We had to keep our distance and also move the convoy out of the way, just in case there were more mines nearby that could go off. I just had to watch. I had to hear him slowly fade away in a bout of pure fear. He was only a child. I knew it wasn't really his fault. I did not blame him one bit. It's obvious he was forced into this situation, that he was only here by circumstance and not by choice. I wish that was the end, but it wasn't. One of the medics, he was a fucking mess. He'd been trying to keep the guy with the injuries alive, but he lost him. He could not get him to hang on. He was distraught and clearly not thinking straight. He was back and forth with command for a while, saying that he could save him, that the mines were gone, and he knew that they were. He was saying things like, "We can still save him. Please. I can't lose another." He was denied at every single turn, but I guess things just got too much for him and he snapped. He was a relatively young guy. I think this was his first real conflict. I guess it was too much for his brain to handle. He pretended to go back to his vehicle, but then sprinted for the boy. One of our other guys managed to tackle him just in time and managed to pin him down on the floor. If it wasn't for that, the medic almost certainly would have ended up dead. I actually had to go over and help because the medic was full on fighting this guy, trying to hurt him, trying to punch him and break free. We had to pin him down, and we had to listen to the medic call out and beg for us to let him not suffer. And at the same time, we had to hear the cries of the child as we watched him just pass away. Well, not long after, another mine went up not too far away from the boy. I'm not sure exactly what triggered the mine. I'm not sure if it was the boy's flailing arms or stones being kicked up or what. But yeah, another one went up in the area, and if we did not stop the medic, that would have been him instead. That mission was an absolute fuck-up failure. We never managed to get the aid to the village that day, and had to plan an alternate route and utilize scout vehicles to gain some more intel before moving in. The scene that we arrived to in the village was horrible, but I do not want to talk about that here. I think I've shared more than enough, and if I'm honest, I would like to not have to think about this memory again for a long, long time. If it didn't pop into my head again for the rest of my life, it would be a blessing. Please do not judge me too harshly. I did not want to leave that boy. There was only so much I could do. I did not want to put myself or the rest of my team at risk and possibly have more villagers die because we could not get aid to them. I pray to God for forgiveness every single night. Hey X, I'm a cable guy. I sometimes find myself in some creepy places, both urban and rural. A particularly memorable experience would be getting lost in an underground maze of maintenance tunnels beneath several slummy apartment complexes. Detritus littered the floors, light was piss poor at best, and, no joke, someone spray painted "No Eyes Always Watches" all over a wall that looked out of place with the rest of the environment. It was like this fresh-built cinder block wall that could not have been more than a year old. It looked pristine compared to the rest of the shitty tunnels. My jimmies were rustled. I could swear I heard some strange high-pitched noises coming from behind the wall. I rationalized it away as old machinery, but still, just felt like sharing. I tend to see weird stuff from time to time. Alright, how about the time I found myself in what was formerly an old school in the downtown, poorer part of the city that had been recently renovated into a community center and an apartment. The building was built sometime in the early 1900s and had two primary sections. A single-story area that housed the cafeteria, gym, and other larger meeting rooms, and a three-story section that housed more standardized classrooms. I suspect it was an addition around the mid-40s. Fast forward into the 1980s, and the school was shut down and left abandoned for several years, before a revitalization project in the 2000s led to it being restored as a community center and as an apartment complex. The three-story section where the apartments were located is where our story takes place. This was in the early months of my job, and I was riding with an experienced technician who has been with the company for 9 years. He primarily handled calls for businesses and large-scale residential housing, apartments and such, hence our heading out to this location. As it turns out, the apartments had no tenants yet. The renovation had only been completed 2 weeks prior, and not a single living soul inhabited the entire structure. Only one person had access, the property manager, a middle-aged woman who seemed normal enough. She certainly did not strike me as crazy when we met with her outside the building. The work order of the day stated that the apartment's internet was constantly dropping in and out at various but consistent times of the day. This was all re-explained to us by the manager as she led us through several security doors that required keycards to open. Clearly, only those with the cards could enter the building, and since there were no tenants, the only person in this city with a card was the property manager. As it were, she, myself, and the other tech were the only 3 people in that building when the story took place. So she walks us towards a stairwell in the back of the building. It leads down to a sub-level basement, and this is where the jimmies started to rustle. The upper floors were all pristine, welcoming, and generally appealing. But that descent, that sub-level was freaky, and this was before anything even happened. As you descended the final flight of steps, the railing and the paint began to rust and flake. By the time you could hit the bottom floor, it was like you had just traveled back in time 80 years, complete with all the wear, tear, and decay that you would expect. Concrete slab floors, faded paint that was covered in smears of unidentifiable liquid, long abandoned classrooms with creepy children's drawings of distorted animals and people. Seriously, it was disturbing. Just imagine any of the old schools in Pripyat, abandoned, empty, but with wooden drawings decaying on the walls. And the worst part was that the floors were not even. I don't mean little dips and bumps, I mean that no 2 rooms were on the same level. When you stepped off the stairway, you were on a short, 15-feet hallway. To your left was a shallow 5-feet ramp that dropped down about 2 feet and led to a series of rooms, and to your right was 2 steps, just 2 steps, leading up into a slightly elevated classroom with a tiny window in the corner, caked in dirt, casting a dull brown light throughout that room. The ramped area did not even have lighting, it was just pitch black. As me and the other tech explored the area, trying to find the building's modem, we pulled out our flashlights, and I noticed that the further into the darkness that we went, the more the light from our LED lanterns seemed to be absorbed by the blackness. There was a point where I could hold my hand directly in front of my light, and my hand would not even be visible. I attributed this to mind games, but it still spooked me and the other tech, and it did not help that each room you either had to climb several steps or stumble down a short ramp. Eventually, we managed to find a single lit room on the far end of the dark series of ramp rooms that had the building's utilities, including our cable taps. We discovered that the modem's AC adapter was precariously loose from its socket, so we reseated it and secured it by zip tying it to the sockets. As we were returning through the dark rooms, I got this weird feeling. I can't really describe what it was, but it made me want to move my ass away and get out of there. I can't quite put my finger on what it was, but I wanted to leave the underground ASAP. We took a wrong turn at some point and actually ended up in a dead end, and due to the strange effects that the blackness was having on our LEDs, it took us quite a while to find our way back to the stairwell. And I shit you not, there was a damn toilet, a goddamn porcelain throne just sitting there by the 2-step room. It was not there before, I can guarantee it. Teleported toilet. And the other tech swears up and down that he did not see it on our way down either. At no point in our search of the downstairs did we discover a toilet, and I can also guarantee that we were the only 2 people on that floor because the door leading to that stairwell emits a loud series of beeps, audible from any other point on either the basement or the ground floor hallway. That was the point when we silently looked at each other and then bounded up the stairs as fast as we possibly could. So we get to the office, and we are talking to the manager, explaining to this lady about what was going on with the loose outlet, and completely neglecting to mention any of the strange occurrences going on downstairs. She seems satisfied with our work, and as we are grabbing our gear and preparing to leave, I kinda offhandedly say, "It sure is kinda spooky down there, eh?" And the manager just casually replies, "Yeah, this building is haunted." What the fuck, lady? The other tech and I just kinda glanced at each other, and I can see his face going pale. Mine probably was too. We look back to her. She proceeds to explain the history of the building, how it used to be an old school for poor children, had a lot of violent students from the rough surrounding neighborhoods. She said that every day, around either 10 a.m. or 1 p.m., she would hear the sounds of chairs scooting across the second floor rooms where most of the classrooms for younger students were located. She is speaking as nonchalantly as can be about all of this, like it's just a part of the workday. A woman, completely alone in a building, just casually mentioned that she hears non-existent furniture scooting around upstairs. A building which I can confirm had no furniture in it at the time to generate such phantom chair scoots, so I have no idea where it could have been coming from. As she keeps explaining some of the other phenomena to us, my hairs start to stand on end. It was like my fight or flight was kicking in, because I really was not enjoying being in this place anymore. She told us how her boss was always calling her crazy about the stories, right up until she invited him and some other executives over for a meeting in her office one day, right around noon. During that meeting, the scoots occurred, and nobody ever gave her shit about it again, nor did they ever come hold meetings at her property. The other tech tried to rationalize it as being some kind of pipework or ventilation in the ceiling, and she just kinda shrugs, grabs a broom in the corner, and pokes out some of the faux, removable ceiling tiles. Ain't jack shit up there. Not but for a single water pipe and a single ventilation duct. At this point, the other tech reins the conversation back in and starts to discuss the specifics of her service. I am still staring up at the ceiling, the hairs on my neck standing straight up, and then a nearby church started ringing its bells to signify the change of the hour. And then we heard it. It was a sound you heard every day in school for years. The sounds of students excitedly getting up and pushing their desks and chairs as they were rushing out of the door for a class change. It was as clear to the ears as these words are to your eyes. It sounded slightly off though, like the actual source of the audio was several feet above where the floor of the second floor was. Myself and the other tech, if we were not pale enough before, we went ghostly white. Even the lady got quiet and just kind of looked up at the ceiling. The sound subsided after a minute. I walked right out of her office, up the stairs to the second floor, and proceeded to look into every single room. There was not a single person, nor was there a single piece of furniture in any of those rooms. None of the 8 units had anything whatsoever in them that could have caused what we heard that day. I just walked back to the office, politely thanked the lady for calling us, asked where the other tech had gone, found out that he had left immediately after I had, and met up with him outside. We left for our next job and have not spoken about the experience once since then. Well, maybe he hasn't. A few days later, I was relaying my experiences to another technician, and after I was finished, he asked me whereabouts this building was. After I relayed the general vicinity of its location, his eyes widened up and he told me that he had gone to that school in one of its last years in operation and that the place had been haunted back then too. Students would report strange sights and feelings of unease down in the basements, and many of the grades of students who took classes on the second floor would deteriorate over the course of the semester, but that could easily be poor kids not giving a shit about math. You know how kids are these days. But to hear that over 30 years ago, people were having unexplainable experiences in that building certainly was an exciting find. It helped me justify that I was not crazy or overreacting, that the possibility that something paranormal may very well have been occurring in that building. From an objective standpoint, it could very well have simply been mind games and faulty ductwork. After all, the building had just had the upper levels freshly renovated, so everything was brand new and still in the breaking-in stages of operation use. But I will be damned if the sounds of chairs and desks scooting was not coming from the whole goddamn second floor. And I still could not explain the light being seemingly absorbed by the blackness, especially with the high-power LED lanterns. Maybe an Anon knows more about LEDs and zero visibility conditions than I do. But yeah, I thought that was a fun little adventure, and it certainly rustled the hell out of my jimmies at the time. I'm hoping someday to get another job at that location so that I can sneak a camera inside and get some pictures of the creepy sublevels. It probably will not happen for a long time though,